Hello everyone and welcome to another podcast. If you are wondering why there is a third successive podcast and not a video, it is because I have been terribly occupied with multiple projects, restricting me from devoting enough time for the videos. But the work on those videos is on and they'll be out fairly soon. My guest for today's podcast is my professor and now friend Alka Hingorani. Alka is a professor at the School of Design at IIT Bombay. She is an architect, an art historian and an author. She holds an MA in Design and a PhD in History of Art, both from the University of California, Berkeley, where she also taught briefly before her return to India. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Alka Hingorani.
Hi Vineet.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, and you?
Very well so far.
I hope it grows through the afternoon.
I hope so. That as well. Okay, so before we move on to our conversation, I just want to give a shout out to Emmy Noether. It's 23rd of March, and Emmy Noether is her birthday. She was
Happy birthday, Emmy.
Happy birthday, Emmy. She was a German mathematician who helped derive or prove, who proved her theorem called Noether theorem, which helped make connection between conservative laws of nature with symmetries in nature, which became sort of the bedrock to help build the mathematics for quantum physics. So she was, if I say so, the badass of mathematics. So happy birthday. One of the great stories about Emmys was because in those days, as we all know, women weren't allowed or had enough opportunities to work in science and mathematics fields. So her friend and colleague, David Hilbert, I'm not sure how true this story is, but it makes a good anecdote, that he hired her as his assistant,
Right.
Teaching assistant, and then never showed up for the class himself.
Right.
So,
yeah. But I think this happened to a lot of women scientists and mathematicians, especially in the 19th century, but well into the early part of the 20th century.
yeah.
I mean, if you look at the most celebrated people who are well known, Marie Curie, for instance, others, not easy lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from that point, I want to segue into storytelling.
Okay.
From that story. So I took one of your class. I took, I think, three of your classes during my time in IDC.
Oh, wow. All right.
Two officially, one unofficially.
Okay. You also taught in my class.
Yes,
You came and gave lectures in the ways of seeing class.
Yes. Yeah. And now we are doing this one
script writing course.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I sat in 3 of your PhD classes.
I'm actually doing what Hilbert did to Emmy.
I hope that's for a good.
Yes, you're teaching and I'm sitting and listening. I do show up, but yeah.
let's hope that's. I think if students are getting something, I'm pretty happy with that.
Absolutely.
All right. So one of the class was on story and narrative. That was the first class I took. I would like you to explain what exactly that class is and what you want to do with that class.
Right. Storytelling is one of those words I sometimes think that is almost impossible to define.
Mm-hmm.
Even though all of us sort of know what it is, if you ask people to say what storytelling is, it's kind of hard. Everything is a story. If everything is a story, then it's meaningless. Yeah. There's nothing about storytelling that is particular. But I think that part of the thing is that as human beings, all of us think of our own lives and reflect on our own lives in ways that we also call story. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking storytelling has probably 2 things that are critical to it, that are the core of it. One is imagination and the other is memory.
Yeah.
And I think that besides those 2 things, there isn't much that I would pin down, either in terms of definition or in terms of, what storytelling is. Since the earliest of times, we know that we have transmitted knowledge, information, mythologies, which generally express the concerns and anxieties of a people as much as their joys or things that they value. Yeah. We've done that through story. Mm-hmm. It's been one of the easiest forms, in some sense, to transmit knowledge or information or value systems. The continuation of what we sort of call culture has happened through story. So it's all around us. And I think all of us think of ourselves as reasonably decent storytellers. But storytelling as a craft or as a skill is a thing that's slightly apart. I think it stands self-consciously as something that you do when you're making movies, for instance, or when you're working as a storyteller, where you say, it's not an anecdote. If I'm going to tell a story that has something to it, has some substance to it, not message, but substance to it. Are there ways in which I tell it that are more powerful than others?
Yeah.
And through time, as we've done that, we've also realized what are the things that work for us as human beings. You know, the easiest word that you will find amongst people is empathy.
Yeah.
That if you can evoke an emotional response in an audience, then that works very well to get them into the story. And as we've understood more and more what works for us, we've created a certain structure. So we say storytelling, if it has this structure and if you can follow this structure, then basically you can tell a reasonable story.
Yeah.
You know, and most good storytellers will flout most of those rules of structure.
Yeah.
That's built into it. It's built into any craft, which becomes an art form. The skill set that you develop is one kind of thing, but what you do with it later, once you're an artist, is that you reflect on it, you think about it, and then you constantly push the boundaries of that structure. So in the storytelling and narrative class of the kind that I sort of engage with here at IDC, the basic idea is to talk to them about these things. What is the structure of storytelling? What does narrative form mean? How does it work? How many different kinds are there? And they're limitless, but how many different kinds are there? What does narrative voice mean? How is it employed? Which are the kinds of narrative voices that work more effectively for certain kinds of storytelling and not for others? Yeah. How does technology insert itself in all kinds of storytelling? How has it changed over time? And those are the kinds of things that we work on in this. The intent is twofold. One is to give them a certain amount of confidence in being storytellers themselves.
Yeah.
And two is to maybe start writing, because that's a craft, which is entirely different from the telling of stories verbally, right? So those are the two basic intents of that course.
And when it comes to writing, there are two types of writing. One is writing as a storyteller, and one there is a writing for when you have to, let's say, if you're an academician, you do academic writing.
Right.
And a lot of people say within that you have to infuse some sort of storytelling, even if it is outright academic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, I would agree completely with that. I think it reaches out the most even to people within the discipline.
Exactly. So which inherently means there is an inherent great value to storytelling to human beings itself, that even if we want to understand that is as complex as, let's say, physics, we still want to explain that through a form of storytelling and not just math, which is still the most potent communication tool of universe. Still, we want to use storytelling as a way to express those ideas.
Yes. I think the longevity of storytelling is testament to how it speaks to us and why, we reach out to it for everything. I remember looking, I have a background in history of art, and one of the earliest artifacts that we have, we think it is the earliest that we have, it's the earliest that we found so far, but we think it's the earliest, in the world. In the world. Is this figure that is made out of mammoth tusk, mammoth ivory. And it's called the Lion Man.
All right.
I'm probably going to mispronounce it in German, but I think it's the Lowen Mensch. Okay. And it was found in a cave in southwest Germany around the time that the Second World War broke out. And the people who were working on it had to, obviously, they were drafted into the war, and it sort of sat around the fragments of this thing sat around in a sack for 30 odd years before people returned to it and began to put it together. And as they put it together, they were astounded with what was created with those fragments. And it's about a foot high, 31 centimeters tall. And it's the torso, the body, the limbs and torso of a human, a man. We think it's a man. And the head of a lion. And the only way in which we can reach back to the time when this was made, which is 40,000 years ago.
Wow.
And we date that from the layers in which it was found, right? Carbon date those layers. And we know that it's between 35 and 40,000 years old, likely nearer 40,000. Or the drawings in Sulawesi in Indonesia that we found, which are also about 35, 36,000 years old, which pushes back, we used to think that the Lascaux caves in France had some of the oldest imprints of human art effort. We now have pushed that date back as well to Sulawesi in Indonesia, which is maybe 35, 36,000 years ago. Bhibetka in India, 30,000 years ago, right? When we look at any of these things and we try to assemble what must have been the life of the people who made something like this, we always resort to story.
Yeah, of course.
And we're building it like that with pieces. We look at it and we say, oh, this is probably a male torso. Then you're looking for male genitalia and you can't find it. There is a plate where genitalia would be. There's no male or female genitalia. But the head seems to be like the female European cave lion, right? And so you think maybe it would be female. And then you realize that in fossilized remains, especially in soft sediments and so on, you have European cave lions that are male that barely have any mane. So who knows whether this was a male representation or a female representation. But you think 40,000 years ago and you think subsistence society, hunters, gatherers, right? Lots and lots of labor. And they're Homo sapiens by this time. We've been doing tool making and stuff from a million years. But by 60,000 years ago
we were
or so.
We were well into it.
Yes, by 60,000 years ago, we are Homo sapiens. So 40,000 years ago is very much us, in a sense,
form,
And it quickens your pulse to think that this is some being like you that's working away on this. And it's a hard life. You live in caves and fire's been, of course, discovered and so on. But life is hard in terms of collecting the material for subsistence. And what they did after they had put together this form is that they dug out an equivalent kind of, not dug out from ground, but like they brought out an equivalent kind of material, an ivory tusk, and tried to use the tools that would have existed at that time, which is largely flintstone tools, to carve an image like this of the same size, right? And just the amount of time that it took them to disengage what would be the arms from the torso in a mammoth tusk gave them some sense of what time it would take to finish it to this degree. And it took 370 plus hours.
That's how many days is that?
At 8 hours?
Let's give them benefit. Give them.
So it's about
60.
It's about 2 months, right? At 8 hours a day. And that's a lot of time. In a society that is subsistence society. Subsistence not in the sense of not having food or being poor. I don't think that those qualities or terms existed in those times, and they didn't need to. But subsistence in the sense that every pair of hands of labor was essential.
And I'm mostly saying like one person is working on one task.
Exactly.
Right.
And for 400 hours. Somebody's got to feed him or her for 2 months.
Absolutely.
Without getting any of their labor for whatever is required to feed them, clothe them, keep them sheltered from the elements, keep them away from predators, and so on. Right? So here's a society already 40,000 years ago that has, in some sense, a kind of art. We don't have anything else over there that tells us this might have been a religious object. But that is, absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Right? So we don't know that there was no religion or whatever. But we don't know. What they did with this tusk that they carved over here, they realized that there are still things, even after you've smoothed it and so on, there are things in the texture of the tusk that don't get erased easily, no matter how much you work with tools to do that.
And these are mammoth tusks or elephant tusks?
This is the one that we found is a mammoth tusk. What they're working on is a synthetic material probably, because our elephant tusks are banned from use now. And they were working, I think, on it in the 80s or something, if I'm not mistaken. So it's recent enough that they were trying to recreate it, where they realized that we are close to 400 hours of working on this, But they realized that the texture of it had become smooth, probably because it passed from hand to hand a lot. That's what had caused it to smoothen out. That no amount of just working with tools or materials did that very easily. Right? So what was this object that passed from hand to hand? I mean, in gatherings or whatever. it leaves so many of these things untold, and that's where I feel your imagination takes over memory.
Yeah.
Because there's no way for memory to intervene anymore.
True.
And imagination takes you both into the future and back into the past.
Right.
And you draw on these things to say, from what I know so far, even in bits and pieces over time, can I plug the gaps in my understanding of what is this far back?
But how do you plug a gap that is so wide? Because if I talk about something that happened 100 years back, I can understand. I can fathom 100 years.
Yes.
If you say 1,000 years back, my mind just becomes numb.
But 1,000 years back, you still have enormous evidence.
Yes.
I mean, you look at the temples in India, right? I mean, phenomenal amount of evidence.
True. But the moment you go 10,000 years, I
You're
don't
dead.
even know how.
Agriculture began then. That's what you know. Harari says that to you. Jared Diamond says that to you.
Absolutely. So anything that you say that must have happened or could have happened 40,000 years back.
How do you know?
I'm like, you're just shooting in the dark right now.
Possibly. I mean, the thing about it, as with any human endeavor, and I don't separate the arts from the sciences in this, because I think we are the same human beings who are attempting to understand things really pretty much in the same complex fashion, regardless of discipline.
True.
In that, then I think what people are doing is they're saying, this is all the evidence we have right now. Then we had the Iceman. Then we had like 3-4 other skeletons that have come to us. And maybe that'll increase now with global warming, who knows, as the ice caps melt and so on. We draw lines from one dot to the other. That's the best that we can do.
Yes.
And as other dots fill that graph, you tweak those lines. When you draw a straight line between 2 points, you always put in this caveat that we do not know. You look at Indian history the same way, right? Yeah. From what we call as the origins of life in this area in an urban fashion. The Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, Lothal, all these places that we talk about, where we say that cities had reached a certain level of maturity. We have more or less nothing until we hit the Mauryas. That's 1500 years apart. 1700 BC, we are saying, is sort of the end of what existed as a civilization in the Indus Valley region, which is now stretching out as we excavate more areas in the Punjab, Sindh, in Pakistan and in India. And then until the 3rd century BC or so, there's very little that we have. We know about the Buddha, 6th century BC, But
that's mostly through anecdotes.
And through what other people wrote about him much later. We know a little bit about the republics that existed then, in the time of Shakyamuni, the Shakyas, and what kind of life they had and so on. But mostly, those are also being referenced later on.
Yeah.
People are talking about it in the past.
Exactly. No, there's very little first-hand evidence from that time that we have right now. Like I was doing a research on Ashoka's life, but there is so little
3rd
available.
century BC, exactly.
That's like not much back in the history.
No.
But still, there is very little evidence there's very little material.
Yes. And in his time, at least, there is self-conscious writing. There are these books of dharma, these edicts that he's carving across the landscape, which are dharma edicts, not Buddhism edicts. They are about living well, living right. Yeah. Right? Performing your duty, being a good human being is largely what they're about. But also, he was propagating this across Southeast Asia, South Asia, and so on. So there is some evidence from his time that tells us, if through nothing else, then through these architectural monuments, we've got some idea of what is happening when. But there are large gaps in our history, even at that time. And so we take these leaps in good faith, knowing full well that as soon as new evidence presents itself, we will have to tweak our view of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? But it's fascinating how much information you get from when what we call the humanities and what we call the sciences intersect. So when you've got archaeology, for instance, and people are looking at the bones of the population that died in Pompeii when the Vesuvius eruption happened. It's just astounding what they can gather from just bones, forearm bones and upper arm bones and so on. I could go on with stories about that, but I think we should.
But that brings me to make an analogy, like as if these artifacts that we excavate from the past are in a way condensing tons and tons of information within itself that we are now in the present carving it out and understanding what it might have been. It's like almost like a poetry in the past.
Either that, or these are all nested narratives.
Yeah.
We look back and we create a new narrative for a past that's that far away, based on our understanding today and our sort of self-conscious conceit that we are going to try and take the period I. That we'll try and understand as much as we can about the context of that time and then draw our conclusions about it. So we try very hard to do that. But there is no way for us to know how much we've been able to gather, except as time goes by. So these are not just things that condense, as you said, all these narratives. They're also things that telescope time.
True.
They do both those things. Yeah. And they do it gorgeously. And they lend themselves easily for us to create stories out of it that speak both of our current concerns. And part of our current concern is to not impose today's ideas on the past.
How
not
hard
always
is
met.
That? Exactly.
Not always met. Because there are two things. I mean, Michael Baxendale in History of Art talks about the period I.
Yeah.
And he says that you can't look at the paintings of the late 19th century without knowing what society was like at that time. But Foucault talks about the blind spot that every civilization has in its own time.
True.
Which never becomes revealed until after its time. So you've got both these things. On the one hand, you're attempting to understand as much as you can about the past. You have only the lenses of the present. You cannot escape your time and place.
Yeah.
You can only try to ascertain that there's no single prejudice that's guiding it, that there are multiple biases that all play
exactly.
out, that create a certain complexity. Yeah. And in that complexity, you might get some glimpse of, oh my God, maybe it was that.
True.
But the maybe remains intact.
Maybe has to remain intact because ultimately, as I said, like even we are talking about storytelling that is happening in the present, and you look at the perspective that so many people have.
Yes.
And it just becomes this complex nested narratives within itself, and that has become the primary storytelling device. Look at it, the way the television series and the movies that are getting most famous, and so they are all based on meta narratives, and they are the movies about movies. Or storytelling about storytelling and how the storytelling is happening. Look at the most popular film of last couple of years, like these superhero films and these Deadpool. Yeah. These are postmodern narratives. They are just talking about themselves. They are not making any statement out of that.
That's true. I also feel though that so much of this is opportunistic.
I would say most of it.
Yes. So I agree with you. There are meta-narratives, but I think even those meta-narratives have been generated once you've realized, oh, this first thing really worked. I'm looking at, you look at television serials, even the ones that are very good. And oftentimes, by the time you hit the third season, it starts to pall. And you're wondering what happened. Yeah. Maybe the story needed to end by the time you had done 8 episodes per season for 2 seasons or 13 per season for 2 seasons or whatever, right? And maybe you were done then. But because the ratings were high or because people were willing to watch it, you go on ahead. And very few of them seem able to hold on to the ethos or the spirit or the energy that marked the initial story that you wrote.
True.
And I think that with franchises also, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, Bond escapes it because it has some very, very strong things already in place.
Yeah.
And as soon as it starts playing with that, like being campy, it loses.
It loses.
Completely.
Yeah.
The moment you make Bond hypersensitive to women,
actually,
you're done. I mean, I'm all for feminism, okay? they want to make a point about that, that's totally fine. But I'm not for it in this sense.
Yeah, I don't want my James Bond to be sensitive.
Exactly.
That's not James Bond.
Part of the whole deal is that he's a cad.
Exactly.
And it's all right. We are cads. I mean, enough of us in this world, And all of us perhaps at different times in our lives with different people and different things.
Yeah.
So it makes a parable out of what is a characteristic in so many of us.
That exactly harps back into that same thing that you said. Like we are looking at older story from current times perspective, and they're looking Bond from what is happening from right now.
Exactly. The built-in misogyny and stuff that is there.
Yeah.
Now it has far greater gravity or weight. And so it bears down on us. And so then we say, I'm going to just throw it off. It's too much a burden. So I don't blame them, but I feel that it loses the charm that it had.
The charm of the original thing that it had.
I agree.
Okay. So I don't know how to segue to this.
Storytelling.
Storytelling, I want to first talk about not this, but some other thing. Because we are talking about movies and everything, so I want to keep talking about movies and storytelling in the motion picture media, I want to talk about Dil Se. Everybody keeps asking. Everybody is adamant for me to analyze Dil Se. I don't want to analyze Dil Se because
as a film, they want you to analyze.
Film, but I would love if you can just put some light on the one song in the film
that I love so much, in that movie.
It's my second favorite song in the film. My first favorite song is still Satrangi.
Right.
In every way possible.
Yeah, I'll tell you where Satrangi lost me.
Okay.
It is in that couplet of Ghalib that is repeated. Ishq par zor nahi hai ye wo atish Ghalib.
Yeah.
And I have heard that sung by far lovelier voices, far greater in the sense that beings who are deeply immersed in Urdu poetry and so on. And it had a certain place in my imagination.
Okay.
And the way in which it was rendered in Satrangi sort of violated that.
All right.
But it's so subjective that, I can't...
That's exactly. That's just like me saying I love a novel so much I can't accept
you
the
can't,
film
exactly. It's so subjective that I can't defend it.
Yeah.
If people like it, love it, more power to them.
Yeah.
It just did not work for me.
All right.
It is a glorious song otherwise.
Yeah.
I even loved its picturization at some level.
It had all the 7 colors and
it had all that, and it was just this thing removed.
Yes. All the songs in the movie.
Yes, most of them are.
Every song. Which one?
Well, this one, the Chaiyya that you're talking about, tries to fit into the narrative by taking him from a place A to place B, which is part of his journey in the movie. Yeah. Just to that extent, it is part of the movie. Yeah. Whereas Satrangi has nothing to do with nothing.
No, it's complete surrealist.
It's exactly. It's bringing Georgia O'Keeffe to like the Thar Desert. Is what the person's doing. And in that audacity, there is a certain joy that I absolutely enjoyed. But the moment Ghalib's couplet came, I'm sorry to say,
no problem.
It was
Chaiyya. We will talk about that song.
Yeah.
What is so great about it?
I first saw it. I saw a video of it, and as much as and I should say this that I've always loved poetry, and one of the things that has been close to heart is the Sufi kalam that my father introduced me to since I was a child.
Okay.
There were these 2 Sindhi Sufi poets that he would always talk about. One was Sachal Sarmast and the other was Shah Abdul Latif Bhetai. They are slightly different times. Bhetai is much earlier, and co-eval with Bulle Shah, who is the original sort of poet author of this Chaiyya song. It's his song that Gulzar borrows from to create this song for Dil Se.
All right.
And this is a long tradition in poetry. It's something that many poets have done through the times around the world, where you pay homage to another kind of poetry by taking a sentence or 2 from it and then writing your own song.
Okay.
Using that. And then Gulzar's done it multiple times and always acknowledged it. I love that about him, that he always mentions. I remember this one line he had said for Dil Dhoonta Hai Phir Wahi Fursat Ke Raat Din, which is the last line of a Ghalib creation. And he takes that and makes it the first line of a song for one of the films, right? And in the tape recording that had come out ages ago, now probably it's available on CD or something, he had said Misra Ghalib ka kaifiyat apni apni. and that's such a beautiful way of borrowing, where you are attributing it to the original author, but also saying that it has delighted me so much that I'm going to take it and make it my own too.
True.
Right? And he's done that with other songs as well. So he did that with Bulle Shah's Chaiyya, in which he talks about dancing for his beloved, who could be either mortal or divine. In Sufism, the boundary is really fuzzy. And most Sufi poetry, as with Bhakti poetry, actually, from the 8th century onwards, from South India, traveling upwards to the north and east by the 13th, 14th centuries, you see this constantly. There's a certain sensuality that seems almost earthly. It's very much mortal. And because the recipient of that sensual speech is God, or is the lover who is both in you and outside of you.
Yeah.
It has a completely different flavor.
Yeah.
लज्जत जिसको कहते हैं बहुत अलग होती है उसमें. And that's sort of what Gulzar has tried to carry through in this song, I felt.
Which, I'm just interrupting,
Yes.
which I think is present in Hindi feature film at least. I can't speak for other regional cinema. But in Hindi, since as old as in 30s, during 30s. I remember one of the most prominent example is that song from Picasso.
That is 50s. I was
That's
thinking
50s.
of Pyasa exactly.
Exactly.
Aaj sajan mohe ang laga le.
Yes.
Janam safal ho jaye. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that is, it's like you have no idea whether, and the picturization is also gorgeous.
Yes.
There are these fakirs singing it, and there, all that Wahida Rahman wants
Yeah.
is for him to turn around. All that she wants later is to just go touch him on his shoulder. And she stops herself from doing that. And the sensuality that is shown us without these two people ever coming physically together
Yeah.
it's electric. I mean, it's mind-blowing,
Yeah.
right? This song doesn't do that.
No.
When I first saw it, I thoroughly enjoyed the music and the dancing. And there was this, A.R. Rahman has such a sense of joy
Yeah.
when he's making his music. And whoever was the choreographer, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the choreographer.
I think I'm not sure.
Okay.
Saroj Khan, I guess.
Maybe. And they had done a fantastic job
Yeah.
of matching the exuberance of his music. And the words I love because they spoke to me of the kind of poems that my dad would sometimes recite to me, I'm trying to remember one or half, but it'll come anyway. And then later on, when I paid more attention to the lyrics, actually there was a lack of congruence between the way it's picturized
Okay.
and what it's speaking of.
All right.
Because it seemed to me that what it's speaking of is something ethereal and ephemeral both.
Yeah.
It's not of this world and it doesn't last. It's transient.
Yes.
Right? Whereas it is being shown on a matrix, that's very real. But maybe it works for the larger film. Because again, what they've done is that they've placed this love story in a conflict zone.
Yeah.
Where, for the woman at least, that conflict is larger than her own life.
True.
So does the love ever supersede what she feels she has, which is also a kind of love, what she has to do in order to free her people or her place or whatever it is. I'm not very sure.
Obviously.
So I stopped mapping it because I did not enjoy the movie too much.
Same here.
Personally.
Because one of my biggest issues with that particular film, and I understand how filmmaking works, and because from an insider I can say that, that was Manisha Koirala's story.
Yeah, it should have been.
It should have been her film.
But it didn't.
It wasn't a Shah Rukh
Yeah,
Khan's
it didn't
film.
happen that way.
Exactly, because that story lended her to be the protagonist because she has a far bigger conflict.
And hers is the conflict.
Yeah.
Right? Here's somebody who's crazy busy loving her.
Yeah.
But the decision is hers. And she wasn't given enough credibility, enough place, enough presence. It doesn't have to be time on screen.
No, that's not
But
what I
it
mean.
had to
Yeah.
be the strength of her character that needed to come through, and it
And
did.
it didn't come out.
So it failed, I think, as a story. And so I didn't carry that away. But the song stayed with me.
Yeah.
And the song is just gorgeous.
Yeah,
I mean, the song is just absolutely gorgeous.
All the songs in that movie.
Yes,
are
but the lyrics of this particular one, when he's talking about about his love being like the morning dew, about him seeking it, dal path, मैं हवा पे ढूंढूं उसके निशान.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you talking about here? What kind of love is this?
Yes.
And yet, when you are in love,
Yeah.
when you fall in love, the quickening of the pulse at even the thought of the person
Yeah.
is such
It's-
that
yeah.
all this becomes real.
True.
It is no longer ethereal, and all of this lasts. It's not ephemeral. It's just amazing in that sense, right? But if you look at it for when you're not experiencing that kind of quickening of pulse yourself,
Yeah.
the lyrics are just gorgeous, and they could apply to immortal or mortal, divine or human. They could apply to anything.
Yeah.
Mera nagma wahi, mera kalma wahi, my article of faith, my story of life. All of that is just that one thing. I would wear it like a blessing.
Yeah.
Ayat ki tarah, right? I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the music also, the way
music
it
is
complements the lyrics. Rahman is like a true genius that I call him. I have I
Yes, I
haven't
would-
yet much spoken about him on my channel, but he doesn't need my.
No, this is the one thing that I learned from writing a couple of times to people who are very famous.
Uh-huh.
And I think Christopher Hitchens said this once. He said, "Don't ever feel that anybody is too big to be moved by your praise."
No.
Because that genuine praise that comes, that love that comes out for a work that someone's done, everybody will buy that. Everybody will take it, no matter how much fame they have.
No.
Yeah,
Absolutely true.
So Rahman needs it, not as a need, but he needs it.
Yeah. But the reason I say this, I'm not anymore his fan of his latest works, because he's moved into a territory where I find consuming music very alienating. Personally, electronics
tell
music.
me more about this. Yeah,
Electronic music, I don't buy that.
I don't enjoy it much.
I don't buy that thing.
Yeah, I don't enjoy it much.
So, for example, if you look at the music of Rosa or music of Bombay, even in Dilse, the instrument, the basic Indian instrument that you're using, I say this on record, Indian classical music, both Hindustani classical and Carnatic, best form of music.
It's rock.
It's the best in the world. The complexity, despite not having harmony, and entirely based on melody, and the expressions that it can create based on that, and
rhythm
complexity,
and
it's unbelievable. Nothing matched. The only thing that comes closest to it is, I would say, jazz. But that too, there is a big gap between jazz and Indian classical music at the same time. So, for example, they call about sarangi to be the instrument that is closest to emulating human voice.
I hear that. I mean, I'm unfortunately not at all knowledgeable about music, so I can't say whether Indian is the best of all kinds of music, but it is closest to me and to my experience of incredible music. I am not a fan of sarangi. No, I'm sorry, but I'm because I guess I always connected it not just to the human voice but to human wailing.
Yeah.
And that to me was always like, "Arey rona band karo yaar." But Sheila Dhar's book, when she talks about Ustad Bundu Khan, that has transformed my view of that instrument, and I'm like, okay, I am going to listen to this more carefully from here on.
You can cry just listening to that music. You don't.
I do. That is what I'm opposing. No, I'm just.
But that is the thing. Even tabla is the most complex percussion instrument.
Yes. It's a musical instrument.
Exactly. It's emulating the speech pattern that humans have. Absolutely. It's not about just creating a sound. No. It's about following a human voice.
Yes.
And that's what tabla does.
Yes. And also the variety of sounds that you can create from that one surface.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. It's
and that's what we are, and that's what Rahman, in a way, I hope he's trying to do that. That he's trying to bridge that gap between Indian classical and the new age electronic music. I won't call it Western because it's digital. It has no country. That's why I don't buy it, because there is no.
It has no religion.
It has no religion. It has no country. It's digital noise.
Yes.
It has no cultural root in it.
I stopped enjoying him after his thing became a signature tune, where he began to repeat himself a little bit. But I mean, I
don't think he give a fuck anymore.
Maybe. I mean, I am really speaking from a place of, I don't know, deep ignorance, because I enjoy music only by ear. I don't know much about music otherwise.
And I hope Rahman fans, please don't be mad. When I say he doesn't give a fuck, I mean he doesn't give a fuck about what's happening in Indian cinema as far as music is concerned.
Right.
Because guy of that stature and not being able to produce
that he should have a certain responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think every artist looks at it that way.
Yeah.
They do their art and he's probably exploring it away, as you're saying, no?
Yeah.
He's probably exploring it away in directions that are challenging to him.
Yeah.
And we don't understand it right now. And maybe, as you're hopeful, it will come around to a place
look at Terence Malick. It took a gap of 22 years, 25 years.
Between Badlands and...
Wasn't finding it interesting enough.
Thin Red Line. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, you were saying something about Nasiruddin Shah.
Nasiruddin Shah is also the same. He has this disdain now for cinema.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going the way it should have been going from the 80s onwards.
Yeah.
So acting for cinema for him has become just like this thing that he pays his bill with.
I guess. I mean, he came out of that really rich matrix, where there were a whole bunch of these people from FTII and NSD
mostly.
And who worked with directors of that stature too, Mani Kaul and Shyam Benegal and Ritip Khatak and people like that. To have had a chance to interact with both art and craft at that level, it then becomes hard to move away from it. You're spoilt for choice at that time. And then once that changes or shifts a little bit, as we saw happen in the 80s, and particularly the 90s, which were abysmal as a decade for films in India, in Hindi films, in India.
We are only mostly talking about Hindi films.
Yes, because I don't know. I see very little regional films.
Same.
And I should see more, but it was a really abysmal time for Hindi films. And it seems to be coming into its own now.
Yeah, I hope.
So, there is hope. And there's people like you who are there sitting, watching over scripts, writing your own scripts, hopefully all of that will make
till the time
magic happen.
Till the time nothing materializes, I won't say.
You won't say, I'm saying it. I know that there is potential, and that's what's important.
Okay, so let's move from audio to visual part of storytelling.
Yeah.
I keep every time you say, and we have this ongoing debate over the visual
novels
aspect.
and movies.
Absolutely.
No.
I keep on coming back to this thing. Give cinema its time. It's only 135-year-olds
as a medium. Yes.
But one visual medium that has been as old as storytelling itself, which is paintings.
Yes.
And I would love you to talk about paintings as a medium of storytelling.
Yes. Again, when we go back to a couple of things, I guess, at the outset. One is that it always surprises me that in this day and age, to this day and in this day and age, we still feel that we need to defend the arts as part of our education.
I know,
right? The reason that it surprises me is that none of us are able to live without it.
True.
If you tell people to shut out all music in their lives for a month, some people won't last a week, but for a month, you realize how empty it becomes, right? And that is how it is with all kinds of arts that are basically forms of human playfulness, a kind of human expression that speaks in ways that permits, I think, a far greater variety of interpretations than the written word does.
True.
Right? To that extent, I am entirely with you where you say, can it tell a story as powerfully? I think part of the reason that paintings last for hundreds of years, some of them for even over 1,000 years, if they've been done on materials that have lasted that long, is that they carry within them a certain porosity or an ambiguity. And so it is possible over time to insert yourself, as true as you might try to be to its own time, to insert yourself in it and be able to see things in it that still speak to you. Because if it doesn't still speak to you, then it is not of any value. It becomes of only purely academic interest that you mark a peg saying, now I know this also about our past. But most of these things are not like that. I mean, if you look at the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the ways in which they have lasted in our society from the times that they were even written down, and they definitely existed in the oral tradition for hundreds of years probably before then, that they lend themselves very easily to reinterpretation, rewriting, rethinking of the roles, sometimes of the main characters in the stories. And so they are able to spread as well. From South Asia, they've gone to Southeast Asia, and no more can you tell people in Southeast Asia that this came to you from India. It's theirs. Over the hundreds of years that they have owned it and then represented it. It's theirs, right? And they insert their local stories into that larger narrative of here's good versus evil if we want to abstract it out, or here is an obedient son, or here is the epitome of the paragon of kingship. All of those things are generic enough that people can make it their own. The landscape, once it is 2,000 years old or 1,200 years old or 800 years old, as you said, it could be anywhere.
True.
It doesn't have to be one place or another. And people accommodate those stories into their lives so long as that story accommodates their lives into itself. And that's sort of how it works. With painting, from the earliest times, what we have, again, as I said, these are 36,000 years old, some of these marks that have been left to us. The paintings of herds of bison in the caves in Lascaux. where if you took lamplight to it, which is the only thing they would have had at that time, you actually have an animation.
Yeah.
You walk and you can feel that they're running across the surface of the caves. The ways in which they've been positioned, the ways in which foreshortening or lengthening of stretched forms have been used. There is an amazing facility with realism, with representation, so that the eye, and an understanding of how the eye perceives, so that the eye is able to perceive it like that, right? What stories they tell, we don't know.
True.
We draw upon these things as added evidence for a kind of life that we build with other evidence. So we find shards of pottery, or we find signs of here fire happened, or we collect these large vats with residue at the bottom, and you say, aha, alcohol existed so many thousand years ago. And then that these were things that were important. These were things that mattered. How they strung together, how they manifested in ritual and so on, we have no way of knowing. Until we come to written records, we have no way of knowing. But still they draw us to themselves. And they particularly draw us when we see the ways in which we've used painting, both media and content, over time. And then we find resonances of that in things that are 10,000, 20,000 years ago, which we had not seen earlier. And then now we've seen in the 20th century, and we realize that some of the concerns seem to be the same, because they mimic what we are doing today with representing our lives. They seem to mimic that in that past. And so we think, if the earliest things that we can look at where painted materials were used to accompany storytelling, as happens in a lot of groups that are itinerant storytelling groups in India and abroad. You see that paintings accompany them all the time. And often they're aids to it. And often they're not aids in the sense that they illustrate exactly what is being spoken.
Okay.
Often they push the boundaries of what is being spoken, or they enhance it in different ways. And you have to read meaning into it. And that is multifold. One is there's a shared sense of meaning, because there is a communal sense of understanding of certain things that belongs in a certain time. There are communities of interest that can look at something and read similar things out of it. At least several similar things out of it. And then there are others who will read more into it and so on. And then the storyteller becomes your mediator, who shows you more things in that painting, which became the job later on of historians and art historians and so on.
But
right?
So that's funny that you brought that particular point out. So what happens when an artist becomes a sort of an historian? Because there are a lot of paintings in the history which are sort of a depiction of history, or an event, or an amalgamation of an event through paintings.
You have to be very cautious. Because we look at paintings today, right? And if you look at today and you see what is unfolding around you, you know what is in there and what is lost.
True.
To a slightly greater degree. Again, it depends on interpretation, it depends on context, it depends on who is doing the reading, who is being represented. Does the person or society or culture or concern that is represented, does that alone have the right to interpret? Or is it better for someone on the outside to look at it on the inside and say, can I do an outside-in view? Which is how you talked about story. So both things work, I think. An outside-in view works and an inside-out view works. And when I say it works, what I mean is that I don't feel that there is any one way of talking about almost anything.
Of course not.
Because every way is going to carry with it certain limitations. When you have a thickness of interpretations, then there is some possibility of entering the world of something that is a complex representation of a complex thing, which is a culture. And you enter that space with humility the moment that happens. In which case then you cannot easily use that for propaganda.
True.
Because propaganda needs you to do messaging that is singular.
And very, very focused.
And rigid. It doesn't allow ambiguity. It doesn't allow latitude.
No.
But the joy in interpretation lies in that latitude.
True.
In seeing what else might be here.
But
sorry.
No, please go ahead.
And authorial intent is not the be-all. Oftentimes it will happen that in writing, as in drawing, as in sculpture or theatre or movie making, the author, director, writer, painter, whoever, might be surprised by what he or she has wrought.
True.
What has happened as a consequence of all their effort, where they thought they were going in a certain direction, but what's come of it is something quite different, right? But that intent, it is necessary to know that intent. It's one more thing that you're putting into it in terms of your understanding of it.
Yeah.
Right? So, like when I look at the Shiva Nataraja in India, for instance, it's astounding to me that we are focused on an interpretation that Ananda Kumaraswamy gave to us in the early part of the 20th century and forgotten everything that went on before that. About the formation of an image like this. Where does it come from? What is it about? What does it stand for? And so on. To me, it's not a matter of whether that is right or wrong or good or bad or what do you like more. I'm just excited that there are so many interpretations, because that is evidence or proof of the longevity of an object.
Absolutely.
It is also evidence of the complexity. It's a really layered object. A culture such as ours, which is as rich as ours is, cannot be represented by a single interpretation.
And that's what everybody wants to focus on. Okay, no, it has only one meaning, and this is what it represents. Yes. Whereas, as you're saying, that is exactly it's like a tracing the journey of that particular object through
the biography of the object, the life story of the object is also its meaning. And the single meaning part of it is often political
most of the time.
And so one of the things that academics do very well, I think, because they are not always but often unconcerned with anything outside of what they are studying.
That's why they are academics.
Yes, I mean often, it isn't always the case, but often, because we are all touched by the politics around us.
But the methods of academics make sure that your personal biases will stay outside the gates of the research center.
Exactly. And also, it is the intent of academia to try and strip it of all those biases.
True.
So, to the extent that it is possible, everyone's working towards that, right? And so then that becomes exciting, because then if you've got, somebody like A.K. Ramanujan writing an essay called The 300 Ramayans,
such a great essay.
It's just fabulous, right? You begin to think, oh my God, this is what you want. And here is a man who is like steeped in Indian culture, who loves ancient Tamil poetry, has translated it. He's a poet himself, or was. I mean, he is no more. Just an incredible mind. And not just a sensitive mind, but a sympathetic mind. A mind that loves what it is looking at.
True.
And is trying to draw out meaning with the greatest affection, with the deepest respect, and those things ought to be read, ought to be studied by everybody. And people like him particularly, but many others also. They write also to bridge the gap between academia and the world outside.
True.
So that lay people can read and find it accessible too. Not all academic writing is like that.
No.
And it shouldn't be either, because some conversations should be possible amongst people who are deeply in a field and are just talking to each other. There's no sin in that, but some of it ought to speak to. There is a certain tradition in India, I think, to some extent, that exists in newspaper editorial pages where people write about it. But I think it runs deeper in Europe. If you look at people like Umberto Eco, for them, writing in newspapers was just a done deal. It was something they had to do. They were erudite, they were scholars, but their scholarship had to include taking the masses with them. Or conversing with the masses at all times. In Germany, this is true. In Italy, in France, this is true much more.
But academic writing for masses in India is like almost none.
In America, even less.
Is it so?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like mass circulation, newspapers and stuff. Now, of course, the world of newspapers is dying.
It was during IDC. I had just made a simple, shitty Facebook comment or Twitter comment saying that how come every newspaper has horoscope daily, but not a single science article, simple science article on a daily basis? How hard it is! Like just take 4th grade science chapter and just printed it. It's not that difficult.
Exactly.
Science is intrinsically exciting.
Yes. But you have to have that mandate. You have to want to do it. And I don't know what stops us. I really don't have an answer for why we don't do it. I mean, in the New York Times, you have a science page, In Saturday, you get a health page in our newspapers, like Indian Express, for instance. It's my mom's favorite page.
Really?
Yeah.
So
every Saturday, it has health news. So it'll talk about, sometimes it'll talk about free radicals and talk about cholesterol in your stuff, talk about what kind of exercises help you with doing what, talk about different kinds of foods, what does GMO mean, what is organic and not organic.
True.
Talk about disease, lifestyle diseases like diabetes and heart trouble and so on. And it's a whole page dedicated to, or of the mind.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is in fact a whole page that is dedicated to health. It's, I think, called the health page.
All right.
And every Saturday you've got this one page in the Indian Express that does that.
Oh, lovely.
And they also, and I don't know whether it is weekly or more frequent than that. But there's a science thing also, where they often get articles from New York Times or elsewhere that are published in the Indian Express. Yeah. I don't see any other paper closely.
Yeah, but something that is happening in field, like ongoing, like look at the American Scientist or the Wired. They have everything that is happening in the disciplines locally, they print it out. What is ISRO doing? Yes. Unless and until I don't go to the ISRO site or just out of my own curiosity, do not go on their Twitter feed. I have no idea what's doing. Yeah. I know what Elon Musk is doing right now.
Yes.
That's how they are just pumping that science and engineering thing out in public.
Yes.
What is ISRO doing? I'm like, they're doing. I'm not saying they're not doing stuff. I'm not saying I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, this General is the Hitchcockian difference between surprise and suspense. We don't like suspense. We just like surprise. Mangalyan.
Absolutely.
Everybody, they'll just burp one of these days and say, here's one more thing we're sending up into space. But you have no sense of anticipation. You have no sense of, oh my God,
this is
this close. Yes.
Exactly. Like I saw the live feed of the latest SpaceX launch.
Right.
Happening on Twitter. It's coming on your feed.
Yes.
I'm not saying people in India are not doing it. Don't take that people wrongly.
Yes.
I'm saying general public is not aware of it.
Yeah.
Science communication is very important.
Yes, and not doing it, you're right, is a disservice.
It's disservice. And then that's why we say we are not doing it. And over the years we haven't refined it enough to make it better. Like for example, there are certain things that everybody talks about and that become part of a popular culture, but nobody knows what that means.
Yeah.
For example, people constantly speak about universe is expanding.
Yeah.
What the fuck does that even mean?
But you can't find fault with what they're saying.
Exactly, right? Because it syntactically makes total sense. Semantically zero sense. Because any smart person will ask that very next question would be, into what? Because if everything is universe, what the fuck is expanding into? You can't explain that unless I don't know if you know mathematics or not.
Yes.
But if I know you know mathematics, we can talk in the same language. But this gap between mathematics and regular linguistic capabilities that we have developed so far is too large.
See, that's the thing. It used to be that all these things, before we hit the 20th century with science, I think we used story a lot for talking about science even. And so when people go and recover information from myths now, they're often able to tack it to scientific or geological events that happened that they're speaking of. For instance, a lot of cultures have a story of the deluge.
Yeah.
Whether it's a story of creation or not, of Genesis or not, is a different matter.
Yeah.
But the story of the deluge occurs pretty much in every major culture. And so you immediately know that an event of that scale must have happened on this planet.
Yeah.
Right? You don't necessarily have a date for it. And I am ignorant, but maybe people have worked on that also, and they have a certain timeline for when a deluge like that happened. But we know that if there are so many cultures that speak of it, chances are that some such event occurred.
True.
When people talk about, in a lot of Latin American stories, when they talk about sacrificing to volcano gods, and often those are elemental gods that you would appease because you were afraid. You had no idea. Right? In Pompeii, people didn't have time to go appease that god.
It happened too quickly.
But when we talk about these stories that, you will go sacrifice a person, to the volcano god or to the rain god or to the fire god or whatever, those are not just anxieties. They speak of a certain level of understanding.
True.
And it manifests in, if I were to do this, maybe whatever is this power that's so much larger than me would be happy. Because this thing that I'm sacrificing is dearest to me, and I'm willing to give that away. The stories of the king giving his flesh from his thigh, to the bird to say, save that. I mean, all of these things are values that we are expressing, are things that we are talking about No, but values is different from what I was saying earlier, where I'm saying things that happened as natural occurrences. Before we came to explaining them scientifically, we did understand them as phenomena. We did understand that, okay, if there is this huge thing, that sound that happens and lava that flows out, this is the kind of thing that follows. There will be fires. There will be this real great heat. Whatever is in its path will probably get flown away and burnt away and so on. That understanding definitely existed. And it put itself in stories and went down. And as it went down, you also started building defenses against those things. You understood waterways and you started building ways, natural bunds to create water in times when you didn't have rain, so that you have these reservoir lakes and stuff like that. You understood what the clay was like and which one had antimicrobial properties, and you learned to line those lakes with that stuff. And we call that common knowledge now. We call that native knowledge now. What wasn't there is the system that we now call science, where we say, can you tell me why this is happening? That wasn't there. But it isn't as if what they were doing was an untruth.
Exactly.
There was no fallacy in their understanding of what was happening.
True. So we were very good at describing things for a while. And we have failed mostly to explain things.
Yes, to predict also from the description. Like when you know that this is happening, if you have enough experience, you are able to. So medicine could be practiced. But medicine was not being practiced on the basis of, I have seen the germs.
True.
And this penicillin is going to go and kill that bacteria. That is not how it was being practiced.
No.
But you were practicing it enough to know that if I know the habits of your life, if I know the kinds of foods that you're eating, if I know where you live and what kind of day you have, and this is what you're suffering from in terms of symptoms, there is a certain charter that I can bring to play over here and say, 3 of these things you should try. Right? And the trial and error part is true of medicine and biology even today, because it's too complex an organism to say that we've got things pinned down, But there we were just doing it through empirical evidence. Now we are saying that we can talk about it because we've seen many things, not all, but many things, right? That's the fundamental difference. And we've gone very far afield now.
That's the problem with Alka and I. We digress like long field. What were we talking about?
So we talked about paintings.
Oh, we were talking about painting.
And how storytelling happens.
So from paintings we came to biology.
Yes.
I don't know. Do you want to talk about Guernica?
Sure, why not? Guernica is a painting that Picasso made, Pablo Picasso, he was the Muhammad Ali of painting. He knew he was the greatest, he thought he was the greatest, and he told the whole world that he was the greatest. He was pretty darn great. I don't know what greatest, but he was pretty darn good. And he painted this really large painting called Guernica, which is named after a town that was carpet bombed in 1937 during the Spanish Civil War. But it was carpet bombed not by Franco, the general who was the autocrat at that time, and his nationalists, but by countries and other totalitarian regimes that were helping him. And one of the reasons that is kind of dastardly to a greater extent is that the entire world was pretending that there will be no intervention in Spain. The UK, the US, everybody had decided that this was a civil war. And the nationalists and the Republicans will fight each other and there will be no intervention. So that no side gets undue advantage, one from the other. Except that Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy were totally helping Franco. And it was Italian planes and German planes that strafed this little town, which had some amount of religious significance, not really much strategic or military significance, even though it's like in later explanations, the nationalists under Franco constantly argued that. And they also argued that they were not the ones who strafed it, that the Basque people themselves strafed their town, right? And they burnt it and so on. And there's no cogent explanation for why they would do that. But it was the kind of fake news, the post-truthism that existed even in the 1930s. And this is Picasso's country. But it is a country that by 1937 he has not lived in for over 3 decades.
Wow.
So by 1904 or so he was in Paris, and then he never left Paris. He traveled, but he lived basically in Paris. And in 1934 he had visited Spain, I think, and he was co-opted by some parties to come to like the Gastronomical Society, which was a right-wing fascist group that was also having a food fair. And so he was kind of embarrassed at the way in which he was recruited without his knowledge into these things. He was not yet a card-carrying communist at that time. That happens only towards the end of the Second World War. But 34 he had visited, and then he goes back. And then in 1937, this strafing happens of a tiny town where, because another town, I think Durango or something, had been bombed before then. They had begun to build shelters in Guernica as well. But the shelters were strafed. And they talk about how they were just trying to destroy the bridge, but the bridge was left untouched. They were saying they were trying to destroy an armaments depot, but that was left untouched. But people, as they fled for the hills, were machine gunned. They were machine gunned from so close by that some of the survivors talk about being able to see the pilots' faces, right? And this news flies very quickly to France, at least, and then probably to England as well. I think George Steers is a journalist who was somewhere in Germany, and he rushes to this city and writes a first-hand account of it. And it is his writing and a picture of Guernica in the night time, and this is important, which is why I mention it, that comes in the newspaper in France, which is Picasso's first encounter with the event, right? Even after that, he does not come in. Prior to that, there was going to be an expo, a World's Fair in Paris in May of 1937. And this happens in March. And March or April, I'm not sure, maybe April. And before this, the nationalists had hired or commissioned Picasso to do a large work of art for them as a representation of an independent Spain for them, or Catalan or whatever. And they would put it in their pavilion in the World's Fair in Paris. But he's not really worked on that at all. And then this event happens and it triggers something in him. And so he starts working on this large canvas, and it is massive. It is 7 meters long. It's 3.5 meters high.
Wow.
So 25 feet by whatever, 12, 13 feet in size. And there are many stories that one can tell about it. I don't know if the listening audience here knows what Guernica looks like.
I'll put them up. I'll put it up.
Yes, it would be nice to put up a picture and for them also to just Google it and see what it looks like. Because if you look at the picture, there is nothing in it that is specifically Guernica except the title. There's nothing about it that speaks of the city at all. It speaks of chaos, it speaks of destruction, it speaks of pain, but it does not speak about a specific pain or a specific destruction or specific chaos, right? And so when it was first put there in the World's Fair, the government in exile, the Basque government in exile, came to see it. And at the end of the World's Fair, Picasso told them that if they wanted it, they could have that painting. And they said, no, thank you. It's been something they've never been able to live down.
Wow.
Because then it went on a world tour.
Yeah.
It went to England, and I'll talk about the painting in a minute, but there's this really, really beautiful, really moving incident that happened, I think in Manchester. The painting was put up, and there were students who had put it up in a space, and the workers were being invited to come and see it. Right? And students who had put it up, they could not find a large enough space where they could make it stand. So they actually nailed it to the wall. Yes, exactly. You cannot imagine that happening to a painting of this stature today.
I know.
But I love that about it, because you own it. I mean, and you feel like it's not as if he can't do something like this again. Painters did that to their own works a lot in the times that we now regard as the golden age of European painting.
They had no idea that thing is going to become the thing.
No, they were never unaware about how great they were. Enough of them thought that they were human representatives of God.
Oh my God.
Because they created, they were creators.
They were the creators.
Yes.
Bad, Picasso.
But they would tear the canvas off the frame, roll it up, shove it in their stinky armpits, and walk down the streets to wherever it had to be put up. And large paintings sometimes would be so large that they would not fit the space that the patron had put aside for it. They would just take out a knife, blade, slice it so it fits, and put it there. I mean, and there are so many of these paintings that we now regard as priceless, as invaluable, to whom this was done. to them this was done, right?
Damn.
And so these kids put it up over there and they nailed the thing to the wall, and the workers came and they saw this. And this is 1939, 2 years after the World's Fair now. And it's been journeying around the Western world. And there is a story about how the workers brought their boots and donated them, kept them under the painting for the soldiers who were fighting the battle in the Basque region. Can you imagine?
Damn.
It was too late by then. I mean, it had already been taken over. The Basque towns had been shut down. Franco had sort of reamed them, basically. But that's what they were doing. That was the kind of response that this painting generated as talk about it spread. And yet it doesn't have a single thing except its title that speaks of that particular bombing.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you look at the painting, you see the forms. And so as I was saying, there are 2 or 3 stories, multiple stories you can tell about it. One is the way I have been talking about it right now, where you talk about its reception. How was it received in the World's Fair? What happened when it went out in the world? When did it return to Spain, for instance, which is much later? It came to Madrid. What happened with this painting with the UN? That's another fantastic story, right? Somebody did a copy of the Guernica in a tapestry. And that tapestry was hung in the main room of the Security Council, the UN Security Council in New York from, I think, 1981 onwards. Right? In 2003, when Colin Powell declared war on Iraq, and there was a news conference, the painting was covered. The tapestry was covered with a blue curtain. Because that painting, or the tapestry of that painting, was supposed to be there because it would be a constant reminder for why war should not happen.
Yeah.
And this is one of the ways you look at it and you think, art is this important? That the greatest power on earth declares a war on a really small country, and it has to hide the painting that stands behind it, saying there really should not be war. Civilian casualties are too much. You cannot just strafe a nation, which is what happened with Dresden. Kurt Vonnegut writes about it in Slaughterhouse 5, right? Which is later, much later than this. That's in 1945, I think, towards the end of the Second World War. And it's the Brits who are strafing the German town. But here, so reception is one thing, and the kind of power that it has attained over time, so that this needs to happen. You curtain it off when you're going to declare preemptive war that you cannot easily defend, and about which you are lying constantly. There is still that quirk of conscience that says, oh my God, that painting's not going to be exposed behind me. Another way of looking at it is purely in the making of it. Like, what did Picasso do to make this painting? And there is something, I mean, I speak of this, I have not seen the original work. I have only seen reproductions of it, right? Not just in books, but elsewhere also, but I've only seen reproductions of it.
Same.
Yeah. But what he did in the making of it is fantastic. So he has tried to use media, materials and processes that come down from almost like the 11th, 12th century of Western art making to the 20th century. Okay. He's also tried to use, like he had spoken against the historic narrative, which had become a mainstay of French painting by the 19th century. 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, you see a lot of historic painting happening. In the 19th century, the Impressionists break off from that. Other things happen. And he had forsworn historic painting. And then he comes back with this kick-ass historic narrative kind of painting in this time. It's done in white to black and what they call grise, which is all the shades of grey in between. People have argued about why he stuck to a sort of a monochrome palette, and not even monochrome, literally like white to black, and lots of grey. And some people argue that it may be that, he saw it in a newspaper and he wanted to carry the power of its impact to it.
Most
perhaps,
probably,
right?
I would say.
He's also brought the newspaper in another way. So if you look at some of the bodies that are there in this paint, you will see newsprint. That he's sort of, he's probably made it wet and put it on the canvas and then pulled it off and stuff like that. But you will see that on the canvas. What he did with the canvas, first of all, is he covered it all in white paint. But it was not just any old white paint. It was white paint in which he had put crushed glass.
Wow.
So there's a certain luminosity to it. It's almost like you're preempting television as somebody said. There was one English art historian who speaks of it like that, where light is reflected back at you from there. So that's the first coat that the canvas gets.
Okay.
Then he's got like grays to charcoal grey, like very pale grey to charcoal grey, graphite and lead that he mixes and he puts on the entire canvas.
Okay.
And then he starts bringing the figures into it. So, the smack in the center of this canvas, you've got a horse that's got such a twisted neck and head and is in such obvious pain that your eyes become riveted to that figure.
Yes.
You can't move away from it very easily.
No.
And whenever you do, you go a little bit to its right, bottom, left, and come back to it over and over again.
Yes.
If you notice the tongues that are coming out from the horse, from the bull, from the woman, they're all dagger-shaped tongues, which is a strangeness too, right? Because these are all victims.
Yeah.
They're not perpetrators of crime, but it's not an easy explanation to find, except to think of it in terms of form.
Okay.
That there's a certain consistency that he's got. He's got a woman whose head is coming in through a window and a really strange, gorgeously wrought arm, which shows you like that arm, you don't mess around with it. It's got a certain stability. If it is holding the light to the truth of the painting, that light is not going to waver. And that's probably one of the readings. Like Simon Schama talks about this, that this arm is one of the arms that draws your attention again back to the body of the
horse.
Twisted, tortured horse. Does the horse stand for the nation? Does the bull stand for the nation? The bull is sort of calm. It doesn't seem to register any emotion, in stark contrast to the horse. Where the horse is tortured, the bull is just looking on. And for Picasso, the bull and the horse were hugely symbolic objects, right? He always used them to speak of Spain. And he often used them in gendered ways, whereas one stood for malehood and the other stood for femalehood. He brought those metaphors from bullfighting into it. Right? And if you look at the horse, there's a lance going through his body. At the feet of the horse, there is this broken, probably soldier, but a body in any case, severed head. But there's stigmata on the palm, which is a very sort of Catholic thing to do in order to speak of martyrdom. Right? There is a broken sword in his other arm over here. Completely helpless, lost, destroyed. But destroyed in cataclysmic ways. Not just killed, but with a severed head. Not just trying to defend himself, but with a broken sword. And then highlighting his martyrdom as the bottom left corner of the painting, where the stigmata on his hand shows so clearly. And right above that stigmata and that martyrdom, you've got this woman, which is immediately harking to the Pieta. And even more, and even more difficult to take, because this is not the adult Christ. This is a baby.
Baby Jesus.
Right? And clearly wailing, the way her head is turned. All of us in the audience know that this is a dead baby. There is no way that this baby is surviving that.
No.
That cry comes from a place of deep mourning. Right? And all of that stuff is happening here, where in some sense, he's taken an event that's happened for a whole city and he's made it your individual story. Every home will have someone who's died. Every home will have someone who's been sort of tried to fight and not made it. Fire happening in places. People trying to escape. Look at the largeness of the foot. The way in which the leg is almost dynamic. But is it a severed leg? Or is it a running leg?
You don't know.
It's hard to tell. And all of this, at one level, the first glance at it, you say it's really chaotic. But the closer you look at it, the more metaphoric it becomes. And the more personal it becomes.
And if I look at it, all the crying or looking has been done by women.
Yes.
If I say all three, 1, 2, 3, they're all...
The showing, the seeing, and the wailing. Right? Because they are the ones who are left mostly in wars, no? At least at that time. You didn't have women fighters on the front line. They were the ones who kept home. And they were the ones who were left alone when everybody died. So that's probably there as well from its time. I hadn't quite focused on just the women, but you're absolutely right that, the man who's there is dead. This is an androgynous figure. You can't tell whether it is...
I can see it's like, it looks like breasts. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, that does look like breasts. Absolutely. And that probably carries a baby for all you know. So it's... and this leg could belong to this figure, except it's also separated to some extent. So it's very hard to tell. But it's such a powerful thing. And that's what it's become over time. It has stood in for all kinds of war atrocities.
True.
Which is also why it's power in the UN, which is also why Colin Powell had to hide it before he would speak about war in Iraq. Which is also why, if you look at any government that moves towards totalitarianism, it shuts art down first.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know, it does not want thought to propagate. And certainly not thought to propagate through the visual medium. Right? So movies will become dangerous. Paintings become dangerous. Sculptures, especially narrative sculptures, become dangerous. Right? If you look at totalitarian sculptures, they're often single bodies in huge sizes. Right? They're supposed to diminish you. Whereas narrative sculptures try to include you into them. And there is a problem with that for totalitarian regimes. They need to block it out. So its making is one thing. When he was asked about the meaning of the horse and the bull, as is true with most artists, but certainly with Picasso, the interpretation would change with every interview.
Absolutely.
And he would get tired enough of it to say, well, the bull is just a bull and the horse is just a horse. You are putting more meaning into it. And then I came across, I was just talking to you a little while ago about Perumal Murugan. And his books were like, there was a court case against one of the books that came out in 2010, Half a Woman, I think it's called. And he got death threats. All kinds of rubbish was done to him, where he said that only the teacher will remain alive. The author will die. I will not write anymore. But then there was, I don't know whether it was a public interest litigation or whether somebody sued on his behalf or whether he sued. I'm not very clear about this. But there was a court case, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and he was finally, it was, he was told he should continue writing. Freedom of speech is terribly important. And there is no way that anybody is going to ban that book that had made him feel like, if he can't write what he wants to write, he will stop writing. And so the first novel, and while he was in exile in a sense for 5 years, 2015 is when this report comes out, he wrote poetry. And he wrote that mostly for himself with no intent to publish, although those works have been published as well subsequently. But in 2015, he wrote this story called Punachi. The story of a black goat. And in that, people have tried to read, like, what does the goat stand for? And he has channeled Picasso, as he says. The goat is just a goat. It has no other meaning besides, And there is a truth in that also. I actually don't disbelieve either Murugan or Picasso when they say that. Because there is a truth in that. Not only is it just that in certain meaning-making phases, but also that allows every other interpretation to sit on it. Because the author or the artist is not foreclosing the possibility of interpreting. Right? So in that sense, it is quite amazing. Guernica.
I don't like Picasso, but this is one of my favorite paintings ever. Like all very little that I know about art. Among that, this is one of my favorites.
It is quite a piece of work. And you should actually look at his work from his childhood.
I have.
And see where he's come to, right? Because 12, 13 years old, he's a prodigy. I mean,
True.
He can do realism.
One of the greatest, exactly.
As anybody else, the greatest painters, right? At 13 and all, he's being exhibited alongside well-known names.
Absolutely. He, if I give an analogy, people who are not into art but into sports, he's the Messi of
there you go.
paintings.
There you go.
He was that good.
And is that man unstoppable or what? I mean, match after match, these days I hear hat tricks. It's crazy.
Them too. We are lucky to see Ronaldo and Messi in the same. People compare like, I'm like, fuck that.
No. I remember thinking that about Michael Jordan in the 90s. I was lucky enough to see that.
People have done that. Like in cricket, who's better, Tendulkar or Lara? That debate has been going on.
But it's a good thing that the debate goes on. We know, they're all greats, and
that's beauty.
That is exactly. See, now that's exactly the kind of thing. When people start arguing about Lara and Tendulkar, enough people will have enough incredible things to say about each. And most of the time, what you come away with is not a decision about who's greater, but a richness of what each one stands for. That's what art does. It allows that. There's no way for you to take this and put it as beside like Caravaggio's paintings and say, now which one is better. But you come away feeling the richer because you have learned so much more about each.
True.
And it's just so amazing.
So we will conclude with the final topic that I really want to talk. How does young student, how would that young student get into all of this? Well, I want you to talk about, number one, getting into the studies of not necessarily art per se, but critical thinking, improving that through reading, importance of reading, number one. What should one do? And if somebody is not into reading, how can one start?
Yeah. Great. So you're ending this conversation on an impossible question, right?
Because I'll tell you what, my process has been a very tiring and I would say very flawed process. So I had no idea how important reading was till I was late into my engineering days.
Right. Oh, really?
Yeah.
But you've come into it then fabulously well, if it is that recent, you know?
Yeah, it's fairly recent.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I came through hard way. It's mostly the theme were more interesting to me than the writing.
Yeah.
Understanding writing per se, I didn't realize what good writing can do unless I read some of the most atrocious writing.
Yeah.
Because I started off with Kafka.
Right.
And I didn't understand anything.
Right, of course.
But
that's a hard one to start with.
But the themes were so interesting that kept me engaging.
Right.
But I went through it, I struggled with it for a year.
Right.
Then I read some better non-fiction. Better I mean readable. Like I got into Malcolm Gladwell. I read Tipping Point. I love that book. I read Blink. Not that great, but still good. Then I got into David Foster Wallace. I read a couple of his articles. I read one small short stories collection. I loved him. Fell in love with that guy.
Yeah.
Then I read Chetan Bhagat. And then I said, oh, this is not...
You didn't say ouch.
No. You could see the difference.
Yeah.
I'm not saying...
I'm not a fan of Malcolm Gladwell either.
And I have sort of worn out.
But I hear you.
So how would somebody start?
Right. I wish that I could say that there was some shortcut. There isn't. When I think back to my childhood, again, we couldn't afford books and stuff like that. We had a small circulating library in the housing complex that I lived in. But I remember my dad never discouraging reading. And I think almost that was enough.
Okay.
It wasn't even like active encouragement, but it was like just joy in listening to us when we would tell him stories that we were reading, and allowing us the time to read without saying, "Arey, padhai karo, kya kar rahe ho abhi," and so on. And so it's a kind of a biased personal history, right? I've come from a place where this was just around me. My brother and I would read like demons when we were as soon as we hit double digits, I think. 10, 11, 12 years old. I don't remember what I may have read before then. I may not have read anything. But I remember Enid Blyton, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew. I remember moving to Alistair MacLean and Arthur Haley. I remember reading Chanda Mama That Would Come and sniffing at it, because we were already reading Alistair MacLean and stuff. But I almost remember all coming, like in my 10th summer break, coming to John Steinbeck like a crazy woman. Somebody had donated a dozen of his books to that tiny circulating library in the colony. And I just devoured all of them in that one summer, right? And became a huge fan of Steinbeck, partly because I had not read anyone better than him at that point in time. And he remains close to heart because he was one of my early loves in terms of writing. But it was just a habit that developed because there was time given for it. If in the house there is no love for it, it's hard to come to it. You can, people still do. But it should at least not be actively discouraged. If you come to it later, as I do, like in my story and narrative classes, for instance, most of the young people who are in it are not readers. We have a book club now. That meeting is going to start shortly. It's actually past the time that it should be starting. There also a lot of people are not avid readers. So we have to find a way to make storytelling, story listening, sharing of all of this a little more easily available. I was talking to my niece this morning, and she is 14. She's in the 9th grade, and she goes to a school with a small population. It's kind of a really lovely school where her English teacher makes them write 2 pieces every week.
Okay.
And he goes so far as to tell them, which I tell my story and narrative students all the time, which we have been telling our script writing students all the time, I don't have the time to read everything.
Absolutely.
I will pick a few pieces from these writings and I will talk about them. And from that you have to learn and move on. But just the act of writing is essential.
Yeah.
If you've begun to do 2 pieces of writing a week by 14, you're well on your way.
Yeah.
You know, even to understand what critical thinking is about, how to build an argument, what inquiry means. And as you do that over time, more and more and more, like any craft, you get better at it. You know, not always, but oftentimes you will get some of the other feedback.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be formal. It doesn't have to be in an educational institute, but you will get feedback, and it builds over time. There is no shortcut to it. The love of reading also through these things. You go join a book club. Just jump into it feet first. Don't worry about, oh my God, I can't finish reading this book in a month's time or a week's time or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you've read, you will bring to it. And when you listen to people talking excitedly about things that they've enjoyed, it makes you want to come back with more.
Yeah.
But you have to figure out that that's what you want.
You have to figure out what you like.
Yeah.
At
If
the
you don't want
initial
it,
start.
nobody can make you do it.
True.
But not wanting it damages many things in your life, I feel. I feel that not knowing or enjoying or being in story also makes it difficult for you to communicate ideas.
Yeah.
It makes it difficult for you to hold discourse, public discourse, to even have a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I think things get richer and lovelier, even when they're shallow, not deep. They're still rich. I mean, there's, you know, even in that, I mean, I don't know. It's something that you have to want to do.
Yeah, true.
It cannot be thrust upon you.
True, absolutely.
You will only run away from it. I used to think earlier that maybe giving shorter pieces to read is a good idea. I have walked away from that thought now. I don't think that's a good idea. I think there should always be a mix of things. You know, short, middle length, long. Those are all retrospective labels we put on writing.
Yeah.
You should just read good writing.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And because writing, as you say, has been around for so long, the things that have lasted through time, you know, there's a certain credibility they contain.
Yeah.
There's a certain way in which they share concerns through time. And so you can almost be guaranteed that you will be able to reach into something that is there in that book.
Absolutely. Look at the books from 1,000 years back. Those are like time travel in a way.
It is. I mean, even go back like 100 years, 150 years, and you've got amazing pieces of writing that have lasted.
Yeah.
And if you stay with that, you'll find some joy.
So before we finish this, just for a new writer who's really enthusiastic about getting into reading also, new readers I should say, new readers, give them 5 books to start with.
Oh gosh. For very, very easy, light, absolutely gorgeous writing, I would say Alexander McCall Smith, and particularly his series that is based in Botswana. The first book in the series is called The Number One Ladies Detective Agency.
Wow.
The characters are beautiful. The story is lovely. There are 7 books in that set. And literally they are an afternoon's read, each one of them.
All right.
Okay. It's about 200 pages, but it's very easy writing. And it's masterful. That's how it's easy, because it's still beautiful writing.
Yeah.
And the characters will stay with you. I can guarantee you that. And the books are titled beautifully. Tears of the Giraffe. The Kalahari typing school, stuff like that. And it's based in Gaborone, in the capital of Botswana. Okay. So you also get to know a little bit about the life in that region. And they're just marvelous books. I like Julian Barnes very much.
I
love Italo Calvino very much. So I would say Invisible Cities. Another thing which is just a set of 11 short stories is called Difficult Loves. By Italo Calvino. I would highly recommend that book, but almost anything by Italo Calvino.
Yeah. He's so readable.
And to begin with, these 2 is easier because they are shorter pieces. Speaking of short pieces, a delightful book is Alan Lightman's Einstein's Dreams, in which he talks about time in many different ways. You know, if you want to get into plunge your teeth into novels and novellas, Gabriel Garcia Marquez is great. Chronicles of a Death Foretold, 100 Years of Solitude. But I mean, there are a zillion beautiful writers. David Foster Wallace, you've mentioned, he's incredible. He's a little verbose. It may be good. It may be good to start with his short stories and then plunge into his novels.
But his short stories are not regular short stories, so it makes no sense if somebody wants to get into first traditional writing, because he's not.
But they don't know, no? People who are new readers don't know.
Yeah.
You never know what you'll fall in love with. John Steinbeck is great. Wallace Stegner is great. Margaret Atwood is fantastic.
Give me books. Tell them books.
Tell them books. In John Steinbeck, if you like travel writing, I would suggest Travels with Charlie. But the book that's the closest to my heart, Grapes of Wrath, which is a classic, of course, is just phenomenal. East of Eden, Steinbeck claimed that all his writing before then was a preparation for writing that book. Okay, but the book that is closest to my heart, and it also sort of betrays an academic mindset, is Log from the Sea of Cortez, in which he goes to the Gulf of Mexico, the Sea of Cortez, and spends several weeks or months, I don't remember now, I read it like a long time ago, with a marine biologist, collecting marine samples that they will bring back to the doctor's lab in Monterey Bay. And the whole book is again a travelogue, but it was also a rumination on what it is to be human. And it's constantly in juxtaposition with other life forms. It's just a tour de force.
Lovely.
Log from the Sea of Cortez. I just love that. And log meaning journal from the Sea of Cortez. That's one of my absolute favorites. I mean, I couldn't afford books, like I said. When I borrowed that book from the library, I still have that diary. I wrote 50, 60 pages of that book in longhand into my diary. There is this whole sequence in which he talks about the relationship of human beings to ships and shipbuilding. What is it that speaks to us? Not just about voyage, but about building a ship. It's just phenomenal. So that I would highly recommend. What did I just recently finish reading? Vivek Shanbag's Ghachar Ghochar. Slim book. It's really, really slim. That. I have not yet read Perumal Murugan, but I'm hearing very good things about him. So Punachi, his latest, the story of the black goat would be quite lovely. Mahashweta Devi, Hazar Chaurasi Ki Maa. She is phenomenal. Her writing is...
That is in my wish list.
It was there in the book club.
Really?
Yes, we've read it. We've read it in the book club.
Late.
Yes. Yes. So is that a reasonable enough?
I think that's reasonable enough for them.
Yes.
I would add my couple of things also.
Please.
Like I really love Julian Barnes, as you said. If you want to get into his writing, Flaubert's Parrot is really good. My favorite of his is The Sense of an Ending.
Oh, that's lovely.
150 pages. You will finish it fairly quickly, but such a awesome writing.
Absolutely. My favorite Julian Barnes is different. I love The Sense of an Ending. And I absolutely adore Flaubert's Parrot. But my favorite in his is The History of the World in 10.5 chapters.
Yes. Awesome. Read all these three.
All these,
all right. And then read Dostoevsky. He's an angry writer and his writing is really angry, but read notes from underground. That's relevant even now.
Even like other books, the Brothers Karamazov is relevant today. It's amazing. Too many good writers, too little time. Yes.
Like not enough time. Absolutely. Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much, Alka, for your time.
Thank you so much, Vineet, for hosting me here. Yes, it's been lovely chatting.
We will do this again, hopefully not soon, but we'll give
at
it
some
a little
point
time.
in time. Yes.
But we'll do this again, definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you so
very
much. Take care.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Hey guys, thank you very much for listening. If you are new to the channel, then subscribe and check out the other videos as well. And if you want to support the channel, then you can head over to Patreon, where you can pledge $1 or $2 to keep the channel going. Trust me, anything and everything helps. Keep watching and I'll see you next time.